The shovel scraped along the concrete, sending a dry echo through the garage. Frank Bishop winced at the sound. It struck something deep in his nerves, like a memory half forgotten. Dust plumed up around his boots. He waved a hand in front of his face, wheezing faintly. He was tired. More tired than he'd admit. His back ached, his knees ached. And even his hearing, once sharp enough to catch a kid sneaking candy wrappers into a mailbox, now filtered the world in halftones. It had taken him 3 weeks just to get out here. He'd circled it in his planner with a Sharpie, garage. Clean it out. For real this time. He underlined it twice. But the truth was, the garage had become his exile. A graveyard of forgotten tools. Busted radios, a fan with no blades, 3 unopened bags of soil from a gardening phase that lasted 5 minutes in 2012. And yet today, something was different. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the weather, cool, gray, the kind of sky that made old men think about unfinished business. He tugged a heavy crate aside and coughed at the wave of grit that came with it. Beneath it, wedged between the wall and a collapsed shelving unit, was something canvas-colored and out of place. Faded blue stained, frayed at the seams. He reached down, grunting as his bad knee protested, and pulled it free. An old USPS mail bag. The canvas was soft, almost brittle in spots, the strap half-rotted. The insignia had worn down to a shadow. He hadn't seen one of these in, God, how long? Since the day he handed in his badge and radio, and walked out of the Brookside post office for the last time. He set the bag on the bench and opened the stiff flap. Inside were the artifacts of a past life, loose rubber bands fused together by time, a dented thermos lid, a route map folded so many times it could no longer unfold without tearing. He smiled faintly. Ghosts of a man who used to matter. Then, near the bottom, he saw it. A single envelope. His fingers froze before they touched it. He stared for a full 10 seconds. Breath caught in his throat, like a diver surfacing too fast. The envelope was yellowed but sealed. The handwriting was clear, unmistakable. Alice Munro. The ink leapt off the paper and into his gut. He hadn't seen that name written in David's handwriting in over 3 decades. He hadn't wanted to. The postmark, though blurred, was legible enough. August 14th, 1993. Frank sat down slowly on the stool behind him, the mailbags slipping to the floor. He held the envelope in both hands, like it was something radioactive. His hands were shaking. 32 years. He remembered the day. The rain. The mailbox. The man. August 14th, 1993. Brookside Lane was a flood zone by noon. A summer storm had rolled in fast and hard, dumping sheets of water onto cracked sidewalks and faded porch chairs. Frank was new to the route then. Eager. Reliable. Invisible. He'd just turned onto Linden when he saw David Munro, standing by the mailbox with his jacket pulled tight, and a look on his face like something had gone very wrong. "Frank!" he called out over the rain. Frank trudged over. Rain dripping off the bill of his cap. "You all right, Mr. Munro?" David didn't answer right away. He looked soaked and shaken, as if the rain hadn't touched him and the cold had come from inside. Finally, he spoke. "I need a favor. One I shouldn't ask." Frank frowned. "If it's about mail." "It is. I dropped a letter this morning. In the corner box near Sycamore. Addressed to my wife. I need it back." Frank hesitated. "You know I'm not supposed to." "I know. I do. But I mailed it in a panic. I wrote something. She can't read it like this. Not before I explain. I swear. I'll talk to her. I'll tell her the truth. But I have to do it right." Frank looked at the man, soaked and frantic. He opened his bag and found the letter near the top. Alice Munro. Same handwriting. Clean envelope. He handed it to David. No one else saw. No one else knew. Later that night, David disappeared. Now, decades later, Frank sat in the same garage, the same letter unopened in his hands. His face was pale. His heart thundered, not from age, but from the crushing weight of memory. He should have delivered it. But when David went missing, when the police searched and the community whispered and Alice broke under the silence, Frank hadn't said a word. He had told himself David had probably destroyed the letter. That it didn't matter now. That speaking up would only drag the widow deeper into pain. So he stuffed the letter into the bottom of an old bag. Then he stuffed the bag into a box. Then he buried it beneath years of silence. And now, here it was, back in his hands. The paper felt heavy. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Whatever it said was no longer his to read. But maybe it was still his to deliver. He stood slowly, using the edge of the bench for balance, and wiped his palms on his jeans. His legs shook, and his chest felt tight, but he moved. Out the garage. Down the driveway. 2 houses down. To the Monroe house. Alice answered after 2 knocks. She looked older, of course, but not fragile. Still held together by that quiet strength he remembered. She opened the door halfway, her expression unreadable. Frank didn't say anything at first. He just held out the envelope. Her name. Her husband's writing. Her history, sealed in a 30-year-old envelope. Alice looked down at it. Then up at him. "Where did you get this?" she asked, voice flat but laced with something sharper. Frank couldn't find the words. He just said, "I'm sorry." He turned and walked away before she could ask more. Before he had to explain. Behind him, the street was still. The rain came down sideways. Sheets of it, like glass slamming against pavement. Brookside Lane shimmered under gray skies and running water, the kind of storm that stopped clocks and erased boundaries. Even now, decades later, Frank Bishop could still hear the sound of it, that violent, steady hammering of summer rain hitting hollow things. He remembered how his socks were already soaked through inside his boots. How his hat clung to his forehead like wet paper. He remembered the ache in his shoulder from carrying the bag that day, heavier than usual. And he remembered the moment he saw David Monroe. The man was standing at the edge of his driveway, just beside the mailbox, like he'd been waiting there all morning. No umbrella. No coat. Just a thin white button-up clinging to his frame. Collar dark with water, sleeves plastered to his arms. His face was pale, not from the cold, but from something else entirely. Frank couldn't name it at the time. Now he could. Dread. Frank! He heard his name over the roar of the rain. Stopped mid-step. Looked up. David raised a hand, not a wave, more like a warning. Or a plea. Frank crossed the street, squinting through the storm. "You all right, Mr. Monroe?" David didn't answer right away. He glanced over his shoulder, toward his house. Then back at Frank, stepping in close enough that the rain fell around them like a curtain. "I need to ask you something," David said, his voice just above a whisper. "Something big." Frank shrugged, trying to keep the tone light. "If it's about the weather, I can't help you." "It's not." David looked around again, then leaned in closer. "I dropped a letter this morning. To Alice." Frank furrowed his brow. "Okay. I need it back." Frank straightened. "You know I'm not supposed to." "I know. I know it's against protocol, or illegal, or whatever. But I wrote it last night. I wasn't thinking clearly. I mailed it too soon. She can't see it." "Not yet." Frank tightened his grip on the strap of his bag. "Why not?" David's face flickered, just for a moment. There was something in his eyes that unsettled Frank. Guilt. Fear. Regret. All mashed into one expression. "I just need to tell her myself," David said. "Not through paper. Not like this. You could explain after she reads it." David shook his head. "No. If she reads it before I do, she'll think I left her." She'll never understand. There was urgency in his voice, yes, but something else, too. Something close to collapse. He wasn't a man looking to hide something. He was a man trying not to shatter. Frank hesitated. He'd been a letter carrier for less than 6 months. Trained well, yes. Knew the rules. But he also knew people. You didn't walk door to door every day and not learn what panic looked like up close. I don't normally do this, Frank said quietly. David's face changed. Relief. Almost disbelief. Thank you, he said. Frank dug into the satchel, flipping past bundled letters wrapped in blue rubber bands, until he found the one addressed to Alice Munro. Plain white envelope. Handwritten. Neat. Heavy with what it didn't yet say. He held it out. David took it with both hands. And that was it. No further conversation. No confession. No goodbye. David walked back toward his front door. He looked over his shoulder once, just briefly, then disappeared inside. Frank turned and continued his route. That night, the rain intensified. The thunder came in slow, distant rolls, like the sky was dragging its feet across gravel. Lights flickered across the neighborhood. Frank sat in his apartment, dry and fed, watching the static on the TV flicker between weather reports and sitcom reruns. He didn't know then that it was already happening. David never came home that night. Or rather, he never made it past that night at all. By morning, the news began to ripple through the neighborhood. Have you seen David? Alice can't find him. His car's missing. No credit card use. No phone call. Just gone. The official report said he left sometime between 7 and 9 p.m. Car found parked near Lake Windermere, engine off, keys on the passenger seat. Inside, his wedding ring. Wallet. Watch. No note. No evidence of foul play. No body. Frank told himself 1,000 stories over the years. That David had walked into the woods and never looked back. That he'd staged it. That maybe he really was overwhelmed. That maybe the letter was a suicide note. Or a goodbye. Or something worse. But the truth was simpler. Frank had let a man take back his voice. And then that man disappeared. The next morning, when Frank returned to work, he found Alice Munro outside her house, standing on the porch with her arms folded across her chest, staring at the street like she was expecting her husband to round the corner at any moment. Their eyes met. She offered a tired smile. And he said nothing. He didn't tell her about the mailbox. The letter. The request. He convinced himself it wouldn't help. That saying something would only hurt her more. He kept the envelope in his satchel for a day. Then slipped it into the bottom of an old storage bin in the garage. He couldn't bring himself to destroy it. And as the years passed, the memory yellowed like the paper it lived on. Until today. Until the box gave it back. Until his hands shook. Until he stared down at the envelope and remembered what it felt like to be asked for trust, and failed to earn it. He should have done something. He should have told someone. He should have delivered it. But he didn't. And now, 32 years later, the letter was still sealed, but nothing was the same. David was gone. Alice had survived without answers. And Frank had spent 3 decades pretending silence was a form of mercy. Now he knew better. Now, he owed the truth. The letter sat between Alice Munro's fingers like a ghost that had finally decided to come home. She hadn't recognized Frank Bishop at first. He looked smaller now. The man on her porch wasn't the cheery postman from the neighborhood memory. He was pale, hunched, with a tremor in his hands and a kind of hollow in his eyes that didn't come from age. It came from guilt. He hadn't said much, just held out the envelope. Her name scrawled in David's unmistakable handwriting. Then, "I'm sorry." No explanation. No small talk. He turned and walked back to his house like he was being pulled by a rope. She didn't stop him. She couldn't. Her knees had started to give the moment she read the postmark. August 14th, 1993. The day her life turned to fog. She sat now in the kitchen, the letter on the table in front of her. The room was too quiet. The teapot had long since gone cold on the stove, forgotten mid-boil. The ceiling fan buzzed softly, spinning shadows across the laminate flooring. Alice stared at the letter, hands folded, elbows tight to her sides. The paper looked like it had been kept safe, untouched, unopened, preserved in the amber of someone else's shame. David's handwriting. It was gentle, confident, a little messy when he rushed, but she would have recognized it anywhere. On old grocery lists, birthday cards, the notes he'd tuck into her books when she wasn't looking. She used to read his words like scripture. Now she was afraid to open them. After a long minute, she reached for the envelope. She turned it over slowly, fingers brushing the sealed flap. Her mouth went dry. There was a part of her, buried deep, that had always wondered if there had been something left unsaid. That maybe David hadn't just walked away into a storm and disappeared without cause. She never fully believed the rumors. Suicide. Infidelity. Mental break. The David she knew wasn't perfect, but he didn't run. He fought. He explained. He never left a room without finishing a sentence. So why had he left her without a word? She slipped her finger under the flap and peeled it open. The sound of tearing paper was deafening. Alice, I made a mistake. Before I met you, when I was younger and stupid, I was with someone. Her name's Lydia. It meant nothing. But she found me again. Said she had a daughter. My daughter. Said she'd go public. Tell you everything unless I paid to keep her quiet. I don't want to start our life with a lie. I didn't want to say this in a letter. I wanted to tell you to your face. But I panicked. Wrote this last night and mailed it before I could stop myself. Now I regret that. I'm going to meet her. I need to know if it's true. If this girl's really mine. I'm not leaving you. Alice. I swear. I just need to handle this right. I'll explain everything when I get back. I love you. Always. David. Alice didn't move. Her eyes scanned the letter again, then again. Her breath came shallow and slow. The words blurred at the edges, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she pressed the paper flat against the table with both hands and closed her eyes. He hadn't been running away. He'd been running toward the truth. Toward her. And someone had stopped him. She rose from the table like her body wasn't fully under her control, walked to the sink, and poured herself a glass of water. Her hands were still shaking. 32 years. 32 years of not knowing. Of imagining every possibility. Of hearing neighbors whisper theories they didn't have the decency to say to her face. She had mourned a man without a grave. And now he had spoken, through old ink and delayed courage. Her first call was to Rachel Hyde. Rachel had been the youngest detective on the original investigation, new to the job, full of questions no one wanted to ask. Alice remembered the look in her eyes. Back then, suspicious, but respectful. Like someone who was listening even when she couldn't speak. When Rachel picked up, her voice was sharper. Older. But still carried that same weight. Monroe Residence, Alice said. It's... Alice. Rachel paused. Alice. It's been a long time. I have something. You'll want to see it. Rachel arrived just after sunset. Alice didn't offer her tea. Just the letter. Rachel read it slowly, silently, eyes scanning every line with the care of someone who's learned how to detect lies, but found none here. Where did this come from? She asked. Finally. Frank Bishop, Alice said. Said he'd held on to it. Rachel's eyes narrowed. He intercepted it? Alice nodded once. Didn't deliver it. Didn't destroy it either. Just sat on it. Rachel looked back down at the letter. Her jaw tightened. This changes everything. she murmured. Alice sat down, finally letting the weight of it land. I thought I knew, she said. I told myself it didn't matter anymore. But it does. Doesn't it? Rachel looked her in the eye. It always did. She stood, folding the letter gently, placing it in a protective evidence sleeve. I'm reopening the case. Alice closed her eyes. The room was warm, but her skin broke into goosebumps. Rachel continued, voice steady. If David went to meet someone and never came back, that means someone didn't want him coming home. Alice swallowed hard. Find them. Rachel nodded. I will. After Rachel left, Alice sat alone again at the kitchen table. The letter was gone, sealed in evidence now. But she still felt it on the table like a heat stain. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting long orange halos onto the road. She looked out the window toward Frank's house. His porch was dark. Maybe he hadn't meant harm, but his silence had hurt more than a lie. Still, the truth had arrived, battered and late, but alive. And now, so was the search for justice. Rachel Hyde didn't sleep that night. She never did when an old case reopened itself. Especially not when the dead were speaking again. The letter sat on her desk, now carefully sealed in evidence plastic. She'd already scanned a copy to her personal drive and made a backup. She'd been a detective for over 2 decades and trusted backup drives more than departments. David Monroe. She remembered him. The golden boy of Brookside Lane. Clean record. Local contractor. Soft-spoken, charming, loyal husband. Gone without a trace. Everyone had opinions, but no one had answers. Until now. Rachel stood over the old case board, thumbtacking the letter into the dead center. Around it, crime scene photos, maps, timelines. Most of it yellowed and brittle from years in storage. She flipped through her notebook and wrote 4 words under a new heading. He planned to return. That was the difference. That single letter meant David's disappearance was not a walk away. It was an interruption. Someone had stopped him. Rachel re-examined the interview list from 1993. Alice Monroe. Lydia Grant. A few neighbors. A jogger who saw nothing. 2 teachers from the school where David once volunteered. And Carl Denton. His name made her pause. Carl had been the neighbor, the best friend. The guy who showed up early to help search and stayed late to coordinate vigils. He'd spoken at the town meeting a week after the disappearance, insisting, "We owe it to David to keep looking." He was also the one who'd said, if he wanted to be found, he would have been. Rachel had written that line down at the time. It had rubbed her the wrong way. Too final. Too clean. But without a body. Without a confession, the case had cooled. Now, it was hot again. She pulled Carl Denton's name into a new column. Known associate. Proximity to victim. Contradiction in statement. The next morning, Rachel drove to the public records office and requested everything they had on Carl Denton. Property deeds, service logs, employment files. She found what she expected. Still lived in the same house. Still alone. Still clean on paper. But a note caught her attention. Carl had overseen repairs on the community center for nearly a decade. Maintenance, access, storage. That meant keys. And space. Lots of it. And David had mentioned a meeting. I'm going to meet her. Lydia Grant? The woman who claimed to have his daughter. Rachel remembered the name. She hadn't had much to say back in '93. Moved 2 weeks after the investigation opened. No forwarding address. Just gone. Until now. Rachel tracked Lydia down through a DMV search. She lived in Sarasota, Florida. Phone listed. She called her that afternoon. Mrs. Grant? A pause. Then, yes? This is Detective Rachel Hyde, Brookside County PD. I need to ask you a few questions about David Monroe. Another pause. Then the sound of a breath being held. I haven't heard that name in 30 years. Lydia said. Did you threaten to expose David unless he paid you? What? No. God, no. She sounded genuinely stunned. He reached out to me. Said he wanted to meet our daughter. Said he was going to tell his wife. That's the last I heard from him. I thought. She stopped. I thought maybe he got cold feet. He didn't. Rachel told her about the letter. And then about the disappearance. Lydia's voice dropped. Are you saying he didn't just vanish? I'm saying I think someone made sure he couldn't come home. Rachel ended the call and sat in silence. She had a timeline now. David learns about the daughter. He writes a letter in a panic. Mails it. Then regrets it. Wants to tell Alice himself. Retrieves the letter, with help from Frank. Tells at least one person he's going to meet Lydia. Disappears before that can happen. Rachel wrote one more line in her notebook. Who else knew? She knocked on Carl Denton's door just after 6 p.m. He answered in slippers and a flannel shirt, glasses perched low on his nose. He looked thinner than she remembered. Older. But his eyes were sharp. Well, this is a surprise, he said. Evening, Mr. Denton. Can we talk? He nodded. Sure. Come on in. She stepped into the living room, still the same brown leather chairs, same bookshelf with the local sports trophies, same faint scent of lemon polish. Nothing out of place. Which, in her experience, meant everything was. Rachel pulled out a copy of the letter, redacted, and handed it to him. He read it slowly, carefully. When he looked up, his face was unreadable. I thought this case was closed. It was, she said. Until yesterday. He nodded once. And you think I have something to do with it? I think you were closer to David than most. And I think we might have missed something the first time. He chuckled. I helped search for him. I know. Rachel didn't flinch. You also told us you didn't see him that day. I didn't. Lydia Grant says otherwise? That got him. A flicker, just a twitch in the cheek. Rachel leaned forward. Did David tell you where he was going that night? Carl's smile thinned. He said he needed space. That he'd be gone for a bit. That's not what his letter says. I can't tell you what was in the man's head. No, Rachel said softly. But maybe you can tell me why he never made it home. Silence. Carl looked at her like he was weighing something. But whatever it was, he didn't say it. Rachel stood. We'll be in touch. Back in the car, she updated her board from her tablet. Carl's name moved from witness to person of interest. And under next steps, she wrote, search warrant, community center, crawl space access. Because Rachel knew something Carl didn't. Buildings remember what people forget. The lock on the back entrance of the Brookside Community Center gave way with a hollow metallic snap. Detective Rachel Hyde pushed the door open slowly, letting the scent hit her. Mildew, dust, old cleaning chemicals, and something deeper, age, silence, secrets. The building had been closed for years. Long enough for nature to nibble at its edges. A few birds had made nests in the rafters. Mold spidered up one of the back walls. The place looked empty, but Rachel knew better. Empty buildings were like crime scenes, they echoed. You just had to know how to listen. She stepped inside with Officer Glenn and a forensics technician named Page close behind. The community center had been Carl Denton's domain for over a decade. After David Monroe's disappearance, Carl had volunteered here almost every weekend. Handyman, event organizer, coach. Rachel scanned the open floor, dusty ping-pong tables, faded banners from long-past bake sales and youth nights. In the far left corner, a maintenance closet with a heavy-duty padlock. That new? She asked. Glenn nodded. Installed after the building closed. Someone didn't want anyone poking around in there. Rachel approached it. Get it open. Paige kneeled down, worked her tools. It took less than 30 seconds. Inside, cleaning supplies. Buckets. Rusted tools. A toolbox. A folded tarp. Nothing jumped out. Until Rachel noticed the grate behind the mop rack. Small. Ground level. Covered in dust. But the air near it was cooler. The kind of cold that seeped up from the earth. Crawl space, she said. Paige crouched to get a better look. She tugged at the grate. It was loose. Just screwed into wood, not cement. This wasn't original, Paige said. Someone added this later. Rachel grabbed a flashlight. Let's see what he didn't want found. The crawl space was tight, just high enough to crouch if you were small, just wide enough to hide something if you were clever. It stretched under the building in low, narrow arteries, held up by cement pillars and old ductwork. Dust danced in the flashlight beam. Paige crawled in first, followed by Rachel. Glenn stayed at the entrance, radio ready. The floor was packed dirt. Nothing strange at first. Then a bump. A subtle rise in the earth, like something had shifted. Paige ran the portable scanner across it. A sharp ping echoed from her monitor. Metal under here. About 2 feet down. Flat. Box-shaped. Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper. Shovel. An hour later, the box was out. Old. Steel. Rusted edges. Locked with a chain and a padlock that had long since seized up. They cracked it open carefully. Inside. A hammer rusted. A stack of photos, printed film photos. David Monroe smiling at a park. A plastic bag containing what looked like a wallet, a wristwatch, and a wedding ring. And bones. Rachel didn't speak for several seconds. Neither did Paige. Glenn turned away, gagged once. Rachel stared at the items with a clinical distance, but her chest burned. It wasn't just a body. It was a burial. Someone had placed David here, boxed him, locked him, and left him under the feet of a community for decades. That night, the forensics team processed the scene under floodlights. Teeth confirmed initial ID, David Monroe. The hammer matched the fractures on the skull. His fingerprints were lifted from the wedding band. The cause of death. Blunt force trauma to the back of the head. No signs of a struggle. He never saw it coming. Rachel watched silently as the body bag was zipped. A weight shifted in the room. Something unspoken. David Monroe was no longer missing. He had been hidden. With intention. Rachel filed the warrant for Carl Denton's arrest that same night. 2 uniformed officers knocked on his door just after midnight. Carl answered in his bathrobe. Didn't ask why they were there. Didn't protest. He simply nodded. As if he'd been expecting this chapter to catch up to him. When Rachel entered the interview room an hour later, he was already seated, hands folded in front of him, expression unreadable. She slid the photo across the table, David's watch. The same one Carl had claimed he never saw again. Carl looked at it. Then up at her. I tried to protect her, he said. Who? Alice? Carl nodded. She didn't deserve that mess. He was going to blow everything up. He was going to tell the truth, Rachel said. He didn't even get the chance. Carl's face twitched. He asked for my help. Said he needed someone to talk to. Said he was going to meet the woman, Lydia, and then tell Alice. Said he had a daughter. Like that would fix anything. Rachel said nothing. I told him he was selfish. That if he really loved Alice, he'd keep it buried. He laughed. Said lies rot people worse than truth does. Rachel leaned in. Is that when you hit him? Carl's hands tightened. He turned his back. Said she'll understand. I knew she wouldn't. He looked away. I only meant to stop him. By morning the news broke. Remains of long-missing David Monroe recovered. Suspect arrested. Former neighbor and friend, Carl Denton. Evidence suggests premeditated burial at local community center. Rachel stood at the edge of the excavation site, now taped off and guarded. She didn't feel triumphant. This wasn't justice. Not really. It was recovery. Truth exhumed. Back at her office, she updated the case file. Status closed. Cause homicide. Suspect in custody. Recovered evidence complete. Family notified. She added one last note in the margin. The walls remember. People forget. But the truth waits. Frank Bishop watched the sunrise through his living room window like it was a stranger knocking on his chest. It had been 3 days since he handed Alice the envelope. He hadn't seen her since. But he'd heard plenty. The news came in waves, first whispers, then reports, then full-blown headlines. Remains identified as David Monroe. Local man arrested. Cold case reopened after decades. Frank didn't need to hear Carl Denton's name to know who it was. He'd always suspected. Not consciously. Not clearly. But Carl had that way of being helpful when people stopped asking questions. Too calm. Too present. The kind of man who never showed his hands, only what was already in them. Frank had kept the letter. But Carl had buried the body. And they'd both kept the truth in the ground. The house was quiet. A little too clean. Frank had been scrubbing for hours, not just the floors, but everything. He'd cleaned out drawers, sorted old photo albums, even polished the baseboards no one would ever notice. He told himself it was something to do. But really, he was waiting. For the knock. Or the call. Or the guilt to finally crush him. It had started with chest pain. Dull, then sharp, then dull again. He'd felt it coming and did what any stubborn man did. He ignored it. But now the pain had spread. Not just his chest. His legs felt heavy. His breath came shorter every hour. He could feel something shifting inside, slow and final, like a book closing on its own. He sat down at the kitchen table, where a blank sheet of paper waited beside a pen. No more hiding. No more waiting. He began to write. Alice, I don't expect forgiveness. I barely deserve memory. But I want to tell the truth, even if it's this late. That letter. I never meant to keep it. At first, I thought I was doing the right thing. David asked for help, and I thought maybe, just maybe, he needed time. That he'd come back, explain himself, fix it. When he didn't, I convinced myself it wouldn't matter. That telling you would only cause more pain. That the silence would be easier. But silence isn't mercy. It's a slow kind of rot. I carried that envelope for 32 years. Not in my bag, not in a box, in my bones. And I let you carry something worse, doubt. I'm sorry. For what I did. For what I didn't do. For every second you spent believing he left you. He didn't. He tried to come home. And now, finally, the truth has made it back, even if I won't. Frank. He folded the letter neatly. Slid it into an envelope. Wrote her name on the front in shaky cursive. He placed it on the counter beside the kettle. Then he sat in his favorite chair by the window. And waited. He didn't wake up. The paramedics arrived the next morning after a neighbor called in concern. He'd missed his weekly walk around the block. The official cause was heart failure. The unofficial cause was 32 years of deferred truth. Detective Rachel Hyde was the one who broke the news to Alice. She met her on the porch. The sky just starting to darken with early evening clouds. Alice sat in her rocking chair, still as stone. Rachel crouched down beside her and handed her the envelope with her name on it. He left this, she said. Alice took it without speaking. She didn't open it right away. She held it gently, like it might crumble if handled wrong. Thank you, she said softly. Rachel nodded. If you need anything. I know. Rachel stood, hesitated, then walked back to her car. That night, Alice opened Frank's letter in the same kitchen where she had read David's. The house was dark, lit only by a table lamp. Outside, a gentle wind stirred the trees. She read each word slowly, once. Then again. She didn't cry. She didn't curse him. She just sat with it. Let the weight of it settle. Then she reached for a pen. Frank. Asterisk, you were wrong. Asterisk, silence does hurt. But so does shame. Asterisk, you gave me something I never thought I'd have again, clarity. Even if you didn't do it soon enough, even if it took everything out of you to do it at all. Asterisk, you gave me back the truth. That doesn't fix what happened. But it means I'm no longer lost in the middle of it. I hope you found peace in the end. You were carrying more than a letter. You were carrying a wound. Rest now. Alice. She didn't mail it. She folded it, walked to Frank's house, and placed it on his porch beside a single yellow daffodil from her garden. Then she turned and walked away. Later that month, a memorial was held. Not for Frank. Not for Carl. But for David. It was small. Quiet. Just Alice, a few neighbors, and a new face, Claire. The daughter David never got to meet. She stood beside Alice beneath the tree in the yard, where a new plaque had been placed. David Monroe, 1959 to 1993. The truth always finds its way home. Claire took Alice's hand. Alice didn't let go. Claire Monroe stood beneath the tree she never knew her father had planted. The plaque at its base shimmered in the morning light. She crouched slowly, reached out, and ran her fingers along the etched metal letters. David Monroe. 1959 to 1993. It was surreal. A name she'd only heard in fragments. A man she'd never met, now immortalized in a suburban front yard. Under the shade of a young oak that swayed like it knew too much. Claire let out a slow breath. She was here. And he had tried to be. Growing up, her mother never talked about David Monroe. Claire had pieced together what little she could, a name on a birth certificate. A photo, creased and hidden in a drawer. And a warning, repeated in quiet, angry tones. He left before you were born. Don't ask. So she didn't. Not out loud. But in her mind she had imagined him 100 different ways, a runaway, a coward, a stranger with good reasons or none at all. She had resented him. Then grieved him. Then, for a while, forgot him altogether. Until the letter came. Alice Monroe's handwriting had been tight and deliberate, like someone carving truth with a knife. The envelope had arrived like any other piece of mail, unannounced, nondescript, but Claire had known the moment she touched it that it would change something fundamental. He didn't leave you, the letter said. He wanted to meet you. He was going to tell me the truth. Someone made sure he couldn't. Claire had read it 3 times before her hands stopped shaking. And then she cried. Not just for the father she never met, but for the clarity she'd been denied her whole life. Alice had invited her to visit. No pressure. No guilt. Just a sincere offer, if you want to talk. I'll be here. Claire had hesitated. Florida to Brookside wasn't a quick trip, and grief didn't always fit into neat boxes or round-trip tickets. But eventually she booked the flight. Because silence was no longer safe. Now she stood beside Alice, neither of them saying much. They'd spent the last 2 days in a rhythm of quiet conversation. Tea. Long walks. A few shared stories. No pressure to perform emotion. No expectations. Alice wasn't trying to replace anyone. And Claire wasn't looking to rewrite her past. But the space between them didn't feel empty. It felt open. At one point, Alice had handed her an old photo album. Inside were pictures of David. Younger, laughing. Holding a fishing pole. Making pancakes. Standing with Alice in front of the very tree they now stood beside. Only then it was just a sapling, barely reaching his waist. Claire had stared at that photo for a long time. She looked like him. In the eyes, mostly. And the way he stood, feet turned slightly outward, one shoulder higher than the other. She'd seen herself do the same. Grief moved differently when it arrived decades late. But it still moved. Later that afternoon, they sat together on the porch. Alice held a mug of tea. Claire had a notebook on her lap, blank except for a date in the corner. "I thought about writing to him," Claire said. Alice looked over. "You still can." Claire smiled faintly. "I know. It's just strange. I don't know what I'd say." Alice took a slow sip. "Say what you would have said at 5. Then again at 15. And then now." Claire nodded. "I think I'd just start with, 'You were supposed to be here.'" Alice didn't flinch. "That's fair." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Claire asked, "Did you ever stop waiting for him?" Alice's eyes stayed forward. "Not really. But eventually, I stopped waiting for someone to fix it. I started living around the hole. That's what it's been like for me," Claire said. "Like there's a part of my life that just isn't built right. Now I know why. You're allowed to be angry." "I'm not," Claire said, surprising herself. "I'm grateful. I mean, I'm angry at what happened. At the people who buried him. But not at him. He tried." Alice smiled. "Tight and sad and proud all at once." "Yes. He did." Before she left, Claire walked one more time to the tree. She knelt beside the plaque and placed a folded note in the soil. She didn't read it aloud. But it said, "Asterisk, you weren't perfect. You weren't present. But you were trying. And now I'm trying too. Thank you for the part of me that came from you. I'll take it from here. Asterisk." She pressed the paper flat. "Let the wind bury it in leaves." Then she stood. Alice drove her to the airport. They hugged at the curb, not awkwardly, not dramatically. Just enough to mean something real. "I don't know when I'll be back," Claire said. "I'll be here," Alice replied. "Whenever you're ready." Claire nodded. Then turned to go. Halfway through security, she looked back and caught Alice still standing there, watching. Claire raised her hand. Alice raised hers. Then the moment passed. But the connection didn't. 1 week later, Claire started a journal. She filled the first page with questions, the second with memories that weren't hers, and the third with this: "I thought I didn't belong to anyone. Turns out I came from someone who tried to do the right thing. That's enough for now." Detective Rachel Hyde sat in her office long after everyone else had gone home. The light above her desk buzzed faintly. The clock on the wall clicked. A storm was building outside, slow and mean. Rain would fall soon. Rachel welcomed it. David Monroe's case was technically closed. Carl Denton had confessed. The physical evidence was overwhelming. The timeline lined up. The motive, twisted as it was, had been recorded, filed, and passed to the DA's office. He would die in prison. But Rachel couldn't sleep. Because something still felt off. It wasn't just the way Carl confessed. It was how easily he'd done it. Calm. No stuttering. No bargaining. He'd sat in that interrogation room like a man who'd simply run out of road. "I chose her," he'd said. Rachel had stared at him. "You mean Alice?" Carl had nodded. But it had sounded rehearsed. Like something he told himself over and over until it hardened into a shield. Rachel didn't buy it. She reopened the personnel files from the Brookside Community Center. Carl had access to the building for almost 10 years. Unsupervised. Trusted. He managed keys, storage, maintenance logs. And Rachel, experienced as she was, knew something simple and grim. People who bury one body don't stop at one. She pulled up missing persons records from the county database, cases that fell between 1985 and 2005. She filtered out runaways, custody disputes, and confirmed out-of-state disappearances. What remained was small, but troubling. 3 names. Jessica Prater, age 17. Disappeared in 1991 after a tutoring session at the community center. No sign of struggle. Case shelved. Never solved. Tommy Elwood, age 9. Last seen in 1987 during a weekend youth day hosted by the center. Witnesses said he went to the bathroom and never came back. Reverend Jim Keller, 52. Volunteered with the center part-time. Last seen locking up one Saturday in 1998. His car was found in a Walmart parking lot across town, keys inside. All three had one thing in common. Carl Denton had been on site the day they vanished. Rachel stared at their case files laid out across her desk. She circled Carl's name on each timeline. She highlighted the last known time stamps. She drew red strings in her mind. Her heart pounded, not with adrenaline, but with a slow, familiar chill. The community center was more than a hideaway. It had been a hunting ground. The next morning, Rachel filed a new request. Search warrant, full resweep of Brookside Community Center, with cadaver dogs. She didn't wait for approval. She made the call directly to forensics. Paige answered, groggy but alert. You think there's more? Paige asked. I don't think, Rachel said. I know. They returned to the center under gray skies. Wind kicking up leaves across the parking lot. This time, they brought more than flashlights. They brought dogs. Ground radar. Full-body coveralls. Evidence flags. And a quiet understanding that what they might find would shake Brookside even further. The crawl space had already given them David. Now they would search every inch of the foundation. Every duct. Every false wall. It didn't take long. One of the dogs stopped near the east side of the basement, where the original structure had been expanded in the early 90s. The floor there was uneven. A false panel of plywood beneath a layer of rotting linoleum. Someone had tried to patch it poorly. Rachel watched silently as the team peeled it back. Underneath, dirt. Hard-packed. But not untouched. The dog growled low. They found the first set of bones 6 inches down. Small. Child-sized. Wrapped in layers of canvas tarp and duct tape. No coffin. No label. Just carelessness. And time. 20 feet away, another spot pinged on the radar. They dug. More bones. Another adult-sized femur. In total, 3 new remains. Rachel felt the weight of it like cement on her shoulders. Carl Denton had been a community man. A friend. A volunteer. The kind of neighbor who lent you a ladder and fixed your broken porch light. But the community center had been his workshop. And these victims, these missing names on old flyers, they had been his ghosts. Rachel stood at the edge of the scene, arms crossed, the wind tugging gently at her coat. Carl had hidden behind politeness. He'd weaponized trust. David had simply been the one who got close enough to see through the cracks. And for that, he was buried. That night, Rachel updated her case file. Homicide count 4 confirmed. Suspect Carl Denton. Status, in custody. She added a new section. Additional victims likely. Investigation ongoing. And in her notebook, she scribbled something to herself. A line she would later repeat at the press conference. Some monsters don't hide in the dark. They wave from their front porch and ask if you need anything. She didn't tell Alice right away. Or Claire. Not until the medical examiner could confirm identities. But she knew the truth was coming. And if this case had taught her anything, it was that truth does not die in silence, it waits. Alice didn't cry. Not when Rachel called. Not when she said there were others. Not when she said David hadn't been alone down there in the dark. Instead, she stood at the kitchen sink, one hand braced against the counter, the other clutching the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Claire sat silently at the table. She'd heard the conversation, but she hadn't said a word since Rachel hung up. Alice stared out the window. The tree swayed outside, its young branches brushing against the glass like fingers tapping to be let in. They were kids, she whispered. Claire nodded. And no one looked for them like they looked for him. They spent the next hour combing through articles online. The names were there now, headlines already updated. Jessica Prater. Tommy Elwood. Reverend Jim Keller. The public had remembered them too late. Claire leaned forward, reading slowly, as if reading fast might disrespect them. No one connected it back then, she said. No one wanted to, Alice replied. They sat in the thick quiet of the house, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional gust of wind tapping at the screen door. Finally, Claire asked, "Do you think David knew?" Alice shook her head. "I think he suspected. I think he got too close. And Carl made sure he disappeared before he could speak." Claire swallowed hard. "That man ate dinner at our table," Alice said. Claire blinked. "Carl? He helped plant that tree. He brought wine when David was promoted. He held my hand the night the police found his car." Claire's jaw tightened. "He was hiding the body while pretending to search for it." Alice didn't respond. She didn't need to. That sentence was a wound that didn't need a second cut. Later, they walked to the tree. Alice had avoided it since the new plaque was installed. Now, she and Claire stood side by side, looking at the fresh etching that Rachel had helped arrange. Claire held something wrapped in cloth, a small stack of papers and photographs. She knelt and placed them at the base of the tree. "What is that?" Alice asked softly. "Names," Claire said. "Their names. The ones who were buried, too. I printed them this morning. I didn't want them to just be part of someone else's tragedy." Alice looked down. Jessica. Tommy. Reverend Keller. And David beneath them, as if keeping watch. "Thank you," Alice said. "They matter too," Claire whispered. That evening, Alice drafted a letter to the town council. She didn't ask for permission. She stated an intention. "There will be a memorial. Not just for my husband. For all of them. For the forgotten, the hidden, the buried. Brookside owes them space. And light." She signed it. Folded it. Walked it to the mailbox. She didn't put up the flag. She just left it inside, knowing the right eyes would see it soon enough. Claire watched from the porch. "You going to stay?" Alice asked, sitting beside her. Claire thought for a long moment. "I think I want to." Alice didn't smile. But something in her posture softened. "We could use someone to help tell the story." Claire nodded. "That's what I was thinking. I don't want my father's voice to be the last one people hear. I want to make sure the next ones aren't silenced." Alice looked at her. "You've got more of him in you than you realize." Claire stared out at the neighborhood. The same streets that had protected a killer. The same houses that had slept peacefully while others were buried beneath them. But also the streets where the truth had risen. "It's strange," Claire said, "to find family through death." Alice shook her head gently. "You found it through truth." That night, Claire began to write. Not to David. Not to Rachel. To them, Jessica, Tommy, and the Reverend. You were real. You had birthdays and routines and things you loved. You didn't deserve to be buried in silence. You're not forgotten. We remember you now. We see you. And we're going to make sure no one looks away again. 1 week later, a crowd gathered beneath the tree. Neighbors. Survivors. Former students. Reporters. Children holding flowers. 3 new plaques were unveiled beside David's. No music played. No speeches. Just a single moment of silence. Then Claire stepped forward and read the names. Loud. Clear. One by one. When she finished, she folded the paper and looked out at the faces. "I never met them," she said, voice strong. "But I will not forget them. And you won't either." "Not if I have anything to do with it." Applause rose, not loud, but full of weight. And in the back, Alice stood watching her, eyes wet, chin lifted, hand over her heart. David would have been proud. The paperwork was done. The files were sealed, the statements recorded, the evidence logged. Carl Denton had accepted a plea. Life without parole. No trial. No spectacle. No chance of escape. But Rachel Hyde knew justice rarely ended clean. Justice didn't take victory laps. It sat in rooms long after the press left. It watched mothers cry in their cars. It haunted birthdays. It waited in the silence after someone said, "I just wish they knew." Rachel stood alone in her office that evening. She had cleared her whiteboard, pulled down the red threads, filed the last report of the Monroe case. She didn't feel lighter, but she felt still. She walked through the precinct one last time, nodded to the night shift, stepped out into the warm air. The sky was painted with pinks and blues, the kind of sunset that didn't seem to belong to this story at all. Too beautiful. Too gentle. Rachel got into her car. She didn't start the engine. She reached into the glove box and pulled out the copy of David's letter. She read it again. Slowly. Like it might be the first time. "I'm not leaving you, Alice. I swear. I just need to handle this right." He had tried. He had reached for truth, not escape. And in doing so, he'd uncovered someone else's buried sins. Rachel folded the letter, returned it to the envelope, and tucked it back in the glove box. Some things were worth keeping close, even after the case closed. That night, she drove to the lake where David's car had been found all those years ago. There was a bench now. Clean. Unassuming. She sat down. Let the silence rise around her. She didn't cry. She never did for cases. But she whispered 2 words into the dusk, just once, just enough. "Thank you?" Then she stood and walked away. Claire. Claire stayed in Brookside. She didn't plan to at first. But every time she thought of leaving, something called her back. A tree. A letter. A story unfinished. She got a part-time job at the local paper, editorial intern. Then contributor. It didn't pay much, but she didn't care. She pitched one story. The Buried Voices of Brookside, What the Town Forgot. Her editor said it was brutal but beautiful. They ran it as a Sunday centerpiece. Claire kept writing after that. Not just about her father, but about systems. About silence. About what happens when we forget the quiet people at the edge of our lives. Frank Bishop. Jessica Prater. Tommy Alwood. Reverend Jim Keller. And yes, David Monroe. She wrote to remind the town that remembering isn't a moment, it's a decision. One afternoon, she and Alice sat on the porch drinking iced tea, the tree casting long shadows across the yard. "People are still talking," Claire said. "Some are mad. Some are ashamed." Alice looked out at the street. "Good. That means they're finally thinking." Claire smiled. A breeze rolled through the trees. The daffodils in Alice's garden bent gently. Then Claire reached into her notebook and pulled out a folded page. "What's this?" Alice asked. "A submission. For the town archive." Alice read the title aloud. "Truth is quiet until it isn't." She looked up. "You're naming the memorial that?" Claire nodded. "I thought it fit." Alice's eyes watered. But she nodded too. "It fits." Epilogue. A year later, a bronze sculpture stood near the edge of the Brookside Community Center. It was simple, a tree cast in metal, with 4 names etched into the trunk. A quote beneath it. "Some stories don't end. They grow where we finally make room for the truth." Every spring, Claire planted fresh flowers there. Alice helped. Sometimes Rachel visited with coffee and silence. They didn't call it closure. They called it keeping watch. And when visitors came, they didn't just ask, "What happened to David Monroe?" They asked, "Why did no one listen sooner?" And that meant something had changed. At last. The story of David Monroe teaches us that silence is not neutral, it's a decision, and sometimes it's a betrayal. When institutions ignore the quiet, when neighbors choose comfort over conscience, truth doesn't vanish, it just waits, buried beneath fear and reputation. But eventually, someone opens the letter. Someone speaks the name. And when they do, the cost of looking away becomes undeniable. This story reminds us that doing the right thing rarely comes easy or on time. But when it finally arrives, it carries the weight of justice, and the power to heal what silence left undone.